Saratoga, New York will be forever cemented in the history of our nation because of the battles that happened there in 1777. A common misconception is that there was a Battle of Saratoga, when in fact there were two separate battles, the Battle of Freeman's Farm on September 19th and the Battle of Bemis Heights on October 7th. Years of fighting on both sides led up to this momentous and violent confrontation, and no one could have predicted the outcome. The British forces, led by General John Burgoyne, had captured Fort Ticonderoga earlier that year and planned to advance towards Albany to reach a defensible position before the winter set in. The American forces in the region were led by Major General Horatio Gates and were on a slow retreat south since their loss at Ticonderoga. But General George Washington sent aid to Gates' army in the form of three important additions: Major General Benjamin Lincoln, Major General Benedict Arnold, and Colonel Daniel Morgan and 500 specially selected men chosen for their sharpshooting ability with rifles, known as Morgan's Riflemen. The site of these important battles is now a protected national park in Schuylerville, New York. About 10 miles south of Saratoga Springs, the Saratoga National Historical Park preserves the sites and gives visitors a look back on an important part of our nation's history. The forests and clearings are maintained to look as they did in 1777, and the park offers a walking path and also a 9-mile tour by car with accompanying audio tours, and you can hear some of those excerpts in this video. The first big encounter, the Battle of Freeman's Farm, came to a head on September 19th, 1777. Across the battlefields today, white posts with blue tops mark the line of American defenses, with fortifications of logs and earth creating the westernmost flank of the army. The British lines are represented by white posts with red tops, and in some areas you can walk between the lines, seeing just how close the armies actually were camped and fought next to one another. The forests flanking the farmland made reconnaissance by British scouts difficult and gave the Americans the upper hand during that first battle. On the morning of September 19th, around 10 a.m., Burgoyne ordered his army to advance in 3 columns towards the American line. A hodgepodge of 22 heavy artillery lined the top of the bluff, and these would have provided much-needed support for the earthwork defenses below, created by the famous Polish military engineer Thaddeus Kosciuszko.
Eyewitness accounts on both sides from that first day of battle recall some of the most heated fighting any of them had ever seen.
It was the hottest fire of cannon and musketry that I ever heard in my life.
We continued to press on, keeping our lines as well as the ground would permit, loading and firing rapidly as possible as we advanced.
The blaze of the artillery and small arms was incessant and sounded like the roll of the drum.
Both armies seemed determined to conquer or die.
While most of the structures and fortifications at the time are long since dismantled or destroyed, the Nielsen farmhouse still remains, standing as it did in 1777, overlooking the western flank. This house was used as an officer's quarters, being occupied by Benedict Arnold and General Enoch Poor, and the Nielsens aided the war effort and returned the land to farming after the war was over. To the north would have been where Morgan's Riflemen were encamped, and along with the American Light Infantry Unit, they were the first line of defense in this battle. The almost impregnable defenses and the artillery definitely helped the American troops, but it was the positions of Morgan's Riflemen and the leadership of General Arnold that would turn the tide. Walking the area of Freeman's Farm today, you can see why this was such an important piece of land to control.
At about noon, a part of Morgan's corps fired upon and killed or wounded most of the advance guard of General Hamilton's column in the Freeman Farm clearing. The riflemen rushed forward to pursue the survivors and ran head-on into the main body of Hamilton's division. The British drove Colonel Morgan's men south of the farm, where they scattered.
Morgan's Riflemen were an invaluable resource, firing from the cover of the trees and going after the British officers, a practice that was not common in war and put the British in a very bad situation. The Saratoga Battlefield National Park is full of monuments and markers that honor the heroes of the battles and the events that transpired. But perhaps the most famous is the Boot Monument, nestled back from the trail in the trees. General Benedict Arnold was able to secure the British and German position and some of their artillery, and if he had died that day, would have been regaled as a hero of the war. But after the events at Saratoga, Arnold was disheartened with how he believed he should have been treated in the American forces, and then tried to sell out important information to the British about America's defenses at West Point. He was found out and marked for death as a traitor. On one side of the granite monument on the battlefield, it recounts the heroic acts that Arnold made during that second battle in October of 1777, but doesn't mention him by name. The other side is a carving of a boot, signifying the place where Arnold was wounded, and it is draped over a cannon with its muzzle facing down, a true sign of disrespect. The area known as the Great Redoubt shows you the green mountains of Vermont in the distance and the overlook looking down into the small flood valley of the sprawling Hudson River, showing just how important and defensible this position was. The second battle, the Battle of Bemis Heights, started out in the favor of the British on October 7th, 1777, but quickly turned towards the American side. Fighting started at Barber's wheat field, and the battle at once became violent and bloody, with both sides fighting close together. It was on this field of battle that the Americans started to win it for good, decimating the British forces both in the front and in the distance.
Colonel Morgan's Corps of Riflemen and Light Infantry under Major Henry Dearborn struck the British right, composed of General Fraser's Light Infantry and the 24th Regiment. General Fraser's veterans began to fall before the deadly accuracy of Morgan's Pennsylvania and Virginia riflemen, who fired from the woods west of the Barber farm. As the British right was rolled back, General Fraser rode among his men, encouraging and rallying them to maintain their ranks, keep up their fire, and make the Americans pay dearly for every foot of ground. But the Scotsman's efforts were in vain. He could not stop the turning movement.
The Americans had gotten many reinforcements in the time between the two battles, and the British, with no reinforcements, suffered deserters, and after the second battle, they were outnumbered 3-1 by the Americans, with the American forces swelling to over 13,000 troops. So on October 17th, Burgoyne surrendered his army to Major General Gates, soldiers laying down their arms and parking their cannons, and Burgoyne himself relinquishing his sword to Gates, the first British to ever surrender in the field. In 4 years, almost to the day, on October 19th, 1781, the Americans achieved the ultimate success over the British Empire and declared victory at Yorktown. The Saratoga National Historical Park takes great care in preserving this site of the turning point of the Revolutionary War. In fact, new information is being discovered about the fighting, the battles, and where the lines were drawn, thanks in part to the American Veterans Archaeological Recovery Team doing the first ever archaeological dig on the Saratoga battlefield, starting in 2019. There are other sites to visit near the battlefield, including the nearby cemetery, which is the site of the Saratoga Battle Monument, a giant obelisk that sits where Burgoyne's last camp was situated. For anyone interested in walking in the footsteps of history, or to experience the beauty of the area at the foothills of the Adirondacks, a visit to the Saratoga National Historical Park should be your next travel destination.